Hey guys, if you're shopping for knives and gear, make sure you check out the description of the video you're watching right now for a link to my Amazon store where I've compiled some of the very best items available, including some of my own personal recommendations. Thanks! What's going on, YouTube? Metal Complex here, and today I've got another interesting knife review / knife overview to share with you guys. This is the CIVIVI Hooligan, another interesting offering from CIVIVI. For those of you who don't know, CIVIVI is a subsidiary of We Knives, and they make kind of their budget line. They're known for very high quality knives, very dependable, usable cutting tools, specifically sort of catering to more of the budget category. This knife was sent to me by at Abby_normal_1969 on Instagram. Please give them a follow. It's because of people like them that I'm able to bring you guys daily knife content. It's also because of my generous patrons. So if you'd like to get your hands on some of these cool stickers and help support the channel at the same time, you can follow the link down in the description and have a look around. The support would mean the world to me. There are a few different variants of this knife. This one is in the sort of, it's kind of a brick colored micarta. There's a bunch of different ones though, so I will make sure and link as many different variants of this knife as I can down in the description so you guys can check this out. Let's go ahead and do a measurement here. Overall length is 7 inches. Blade length is coming in at 3. It's right on the line. Depends on who you ask. So it looks like 3 to me. 2.75 inches on the cutting edge. There is a very large sharpening choil there. I don't know that I'd call that a finger choil. We'll actually, we'll talk about that here in a sec. Let's go ahead and do some size comparisons up against the Ontario Rat Model 1. The Rat 1's coming in at 8.6 inches overall. How about up against the Spyderco PM2? PM2's coming in at 8.3 inches overall. How about up against the Benchmade Reptilian, or in this case, the Ritter Hogue? Ritter Hogue's coming in at 8 inches overall. And last but not least, the Spyderco Para 3. Para 3's coming in at 7.25 inches overall. How's the action of this guy? Well, the knife is running on phosphor bronze. Let you guys take a look. It is kind of a shorter knife, and this area here, you know, considering blade height and its relationship to the handle, the cutout here, for whatever reason, I'm wanting the thumb stud to be a little bit closer, but just adapting and moving your thumb over a little bit. I think people who are handling this knife will kind of understand what I'm saying. It's very easy to wheel out, and it is easy to deploy. I don't know that I'd say that the thumb stud is in the most optimal position, but that could be based on the other thumb stud knives that I'm used to deploying. This is a shorter knife than I thought it was going to be. It's got a shorter handle, and my hands, for whatever reason, are not finding a natural position on the knife. But it is the case with most knives that you will adapt to them, and that might just be the case here. Because it runs on phosphor bronze, I would say it certainly is more ready to be used in a dusty, dirty environment than a knife with bearings. It does slow the action down a little bit. I wouldn't say that it's bad or anything like that. It's smooth, perhaps just a little bit tight because it's kind of new. I imagine like most CIVIVI knives and most knives in general, it'll break in a little bit. For whatever reason, I have a lot of trouble doing the reverse flick on this knife. I can kind of get it, but it just doesn't feel 100% natural, and I normally don't have trouble doing that. It doesn't really matter. It has no bearing on the utility of the knife because, again, it's very easy to simply wheel out. So I don't suppose I'm going to judge it too hard, especially considering it is a budget knife, at least how I'd define it. Carry profile. So thickness here, you can see it's about the same thickness as a Spyderco Para 3. Height and length up against two knives that have awkward carry profiles, and nobody ever complains about, the PM2 and Para 3. It's not as long or as tall as either of them, so you should be okay in that department. In terms of materials, we are looking at D2 steel in a very, thin blade stock, as is the case with most CIVIVI knives. Blade stock coming in at under 120 thousandths. I'm going to do that again because honestly it looks thinner than that, just to be sure. Yeah, about 120 thousandths. So a thin blade stock, pretty typical of CIVIVI. We've got steel liners, and let me go ahead and grab my flashlight so you guys can take a look on the inside. There is a little bit of milling on the inside, which is nice. I wouldn't say that the micarta is thick or anything like that. We really shouldn't have too much weight on this guy. We'll go ahead and, if the scale wants to work with us today, go ahead and weigh it real quick. Yeah, totally reasonable, 3.28 ounces. I don't have a problem with that. If you go by the whole ounce and inch thing, it's a little bit over that, but for the most part, this is going to be easy to carry unless you are wearing super tight pants or athletic shorts, in which case you might want to go with a mini bug out, which is fine. It's a perfectly good knife in that situation. For everybody else, it should be pretty easy. Let's go ahead and do a hardware check. You get out my handy dandy WIA magnetic driver and WIA bit selector, two items that are very inexpensive. and very recommendable. You can find them in the Amazon store that I reference at the beginning of every video. Just pull open the store and look for knife maintenance. Like most CIVIVI knives, I'm going to guess that the pivot is T8 and that the handle hardware is also T8, which seems to be the case here. The pocket clip screws are probably T6. Yeah. So the pocket clip screws are T6. That's fine. You don't necessarily have to take the pocket clip off unless you're trying to remove the non-show side scale from the liner. So I'm not going to fault it for that. T8's great. The bits are a little bit bigger, the bit heads, and the fastener heads are a little bit bigger, so it's less likely to strip out. And they're all the same size, which is great. There's also very minimal hardware. You have the pivot, you've got 2 screws, and that's pretty much it, other than, of course, the blade, the bearings, and the pocket, or I'm sorry, the blade, the washers, and the pocket clip. So that's good. What did we not cover? Did we cover everything? I think so. So let's talk about the anatomy of this knife. This micarta is nice and smooth. It's nicely knocked down. Some people might like that kind of brownish sort of, it looks like brick colored to me, right? Some people might like that. I don't know that it's really my cup of tea. Sometimes micarta can really look good, and sometimes it's just blah. You know, I mean, that's the case with everything, but for me, it's like I either really love it or I just don't like it at all. This isn't my color, but there are other colors of this knife, so, you know, if it's not yours either, then check one of the other ones out. It certainly is nicely knocked down, though. There's no sharp edges or anything like that. Up on the blade, we have a satin-finished drop point blade. I think the thumb studs themselves are designed well, but the positioning was awkward to me. You know, if this were a bigger knife with a longer handle, I think it would be a lot easier or a lot more natural for me to engage. But if you've got, I wear a size XL glove, which doesn't mean I have an XL sized hand. Those of you who, you know, regularly buy work gloves, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have a slightly larger than normal hand. If you've got medium or small sized hands, you might enjoy, you know, the interaction between, you know, how you're holding it and of course the thumb stud a little better than me. But that's my initial reaction to this, is it feels a little awkward to deploy. Perhaps combination of washers and the fact that it's a little bit awkward to deploy, maybe that has something to do with it. The blade in true CIVIVI fashion is once again satin finished. I'm kind of getting tired of that with CIVIVI. I know this isn't a new design, but it's like every single blade that they do is a good blade, but it's the same satin finished blade over and over and over again. I'd kind of like them to mix it up a little bit. You know, it's like have some, I mean, like We does like the black tumbled, and they do the stone wash, and they got satin, and they got the two-tone, you know. And I understand that that can potentially add cost to the knife, but like CJRB has a tumbled option, and they're selling $35 to $40 knives with the exact same materials. You know, in my opinion, the overall fit and finish of a We knife is a little bit better than a CJRB, but if they can do tumbling, I kind of like to see a We knife with some tumbling. And this is unfair because I'm coming down on the Hooligan for this, where every CIVIVI knife has this kind of same thing, the same complaint for the most part, and I haven't complained about it much there. So that's not really a fair complaint. I just personally like a tumbled finish better, mainly because it keeps edges like this from getting too sharp. I'm catching my fingernail a little bit on this, but to be honest, it's really not that bad. So I don't know, I can't really complain too much. It comes down to a fairly thin tip. It's a fairly delicate tip, so be cognizant of that. On the plus side, you have, again, in true CIVIVI fashion, a super thin cutting edge. This knife will perform. I wouldn't say that the blade is completely in, or I'm sorry, that the thumb stud is completely in the cutting path of the thumb stud. Or I'm sorry, the thumb studs are not completely in the cutting path. Jeez, I don't know why I stumbled around that. What frustrates me is this area right here. This is not a choil, not a finger choil, and it's just a huge sharpening choil. I don't know. I want the thumb stud to be further up and back so that, number one, it's easier for me to engage, or at least more natural compared to the other thumb stud knives that I'm used to deploying that I consider to be good. Perhaps that's a complaint that's, you know, catered directly towards my own preferences, so that might not be fair. Not everybody might think of it that way. It just feels awkward to me. But if they did that, it would certainly clear the cutting path. And then honestly, I'd like a much bigger area right here. It's like either do a full choil or don't do one. Don't do this. This is, just give me a regular sharpening choil and let me make use of the full edge, and then I won't be tempted to put my hands up there in the first place. But in this design, I am kind of tempted to put my finger up here, but even at a single knuckle, right, I'm definitely running the risk of running my finger up on the blade. So just give me another, 1/4 inch there and make a full choil if you're going to do that. That's honestly my opinion. Other than that, the blade's great. It's totally sterile. It's going to be a user blade. It's made out of D2, which I don't have a problem with. I understand now it's kind of trendy to complain about D2. It all depends on how it's heat treated. I think the vast majority of people complaining about D2 are probably just following suit, and they're like, Bill and Joe complained about it, so I'm going to complain about it too. D2's composition is a good composition, whether it's ingot form or powder formed, but it depends on the heat treat. If we've got a whole bunch of companies heat treating it incorrectly, that sucks, but it doesn't mean that everybody heat treats it incorrectly. Truth be told, I have no idea how this is heat treated. I'm just saying, don't wave off D2 entirely, because the composition, again, is a good one. It just, if it's heat treated correctly, it's going to perform the way that it's intended to perform. If it's not heat treated correctly, then it won't. That's the simple truth of that. Moving down to the handle scales again, not my cup of tea, but it looks nice. I'm sorry, it's nicely rounded off. I do like CIVIVI's show side pivots. I always talk about that. That's nice. Keep it off the blade and keep it on the handle. That's nice. I love that there is a position for the pocket clip on the left-handed side, even though this is a right-handed liner lock. This is still pretty easy to manipulate in terms of just wheeling it out. Still, having a little bit of trouble naturally engaging that thumb stud for whatever reason. It's not like I haven't handled knives that are a little bit smaller that have thumb studs, but I don't know. It's weird. It's the thumb stud is too far out this way for me to feel comfortable with it. But again, if you're the same as me, you'll likely adapt to it. We've got a lanyard hole there for people who like lanyards, and it's not being prioritized over the pocket clip, so that's fine. The pocket clip is a typical CIVIVI pocket clip with the recessed screws. It's got a little bit of a bill, so it's probably going to catch on something and bend at some point or even break off. If it bends, no problem. Just take this off and bend it back, and you're good to go. It will certainly carry well, and it certainly carries pretty deep, so no issue there. The knife does lock up solid, no blade play up, down, left, or right. And it is engaging a little early for a CIVIVI knife, honestly, at about 35%. And I believe the blade is pretty darn close to centered, if not perfectly centered. A couple of standoffs back here, and that's nice. This is the same as, as every CIVIVI knife that I've handled in terms of the idea and the construction. They have the total amount of hardware preferable. They're using phosphor bronze and D2, and they're using micarta. This is the design, I think, altogether on paper, this sounds like a great design. What bothers me here is not the fact that it is small, but considering how little room I have on the handle, they decided to create 3 specific areas for your finger, or little, I guess you'd call those choils or cutouts for your fingers, right? So the knife kind of demands that you hold it like this. I can squeeze my finger in here, but what it does is it moves each finger up onto a bump, kind of, and it forces me to hold the knife in a hammer grip in a way that I don't want to hold it, right? If it had a finger choil, then okay, I still don't like that I'm being forced to put my fingers exactly in these positions, but then I can put my finger up here, but you can't do that because this isn't big enough. Unless you're a child, which you shouldn't be holding this knife in the first place if you're a child, but unless you're a child, you're not going to have fingers that are small enough to fit in that area the way that they would in a true finger choil. So I'm kind of frustrated by the handle. And most people would say, so what? Just hold it with 3 fingers. I don't want to. On a knife like this, it's big enough to where it should be a full-size knife, right? Up against the pair of 3 here, I can hold a pair of 3 without engaging that forward choil in this position here, because there's no suggested place for my fingers. It's just like, just put them wherever. The lines are going to mold to your hands wherever it is that you put them. But here it's like designated spots. And then if I want to, I can choke up into what is a full finger choil here, right? Difference in cutting edge is not much. Let's say they did do a full choil here. There you go. There's the choils right there beside each other. Look how much cutting edge you'd be sacrificing if they just made a full choil there. A lot of people look at this and they go, well, I don't like the Para 3. I don't like how big the handle is in comparison with the blade. That's fine. You don't have to think like me. Again, I'd rather them either do the forward choil or not do it at all. And honestly, in terms of the handle, I think with this knife, the thumb stud being moved back and honestly closer to the scales, right? And there being no forward choil and this area being straight, I would like this knife much more. Much, much, much more. But the combination of all those things is just awkward. And it's like it's holding this knife back from being something a lot better. Truthfully, it's holding the knife back from being just as good as any other CIVIVI. If I had handled this knife 2-3 years ago, I would have gone, yeah, it's a little bit awkward, but this is a great knife. And, you know, in comparison with a lot of the other stuff out there, you know, it would have impressed me a lot more. But now the competition, largely being created by CIVIVI themselves, is making this feel a little lackluster. I think a lot of people do like the Hooligan, but truthfully, this just isn't my favorite CIVIVI. In fact, I think this is probably my least favorite CIVIVI. Is it still a good knife? Yeah, truthfully, yeah, it is. I mean, like, this knife runs $50 to $55, which is very similar to other CIVIVI knives. Yes, you can get knives of similar build quality with similar materials for a little bit less money. This is still a good knife. It's not a mind-blowing price. It's not severely overpriced or underpriced or anything like that. I mean, like, it's like, okay, yeah, looks, I mean, that's pretty typical $50, $55 knife. It's just kind of underwhelming. So can I recommend it? Well, I can't not recommend it. You know, if you really like how this knife looks, you know, maybe you do have a little bit smaller hands, right? And maybe you really like the look of the micarta, the blade. Maybe for whatever reason, this knife would be easier for you to manipulate. You know, for the money, yeah, I mean, you're still getting a knife that is well put together with materials that correspond with what I expect in this price range. It's just, for me, it's an awkward interaction. It's not a pleasant experience with this knife. It's just, it's not like infuriating, like, this is terrible, it's completely unusable. No, I mean, it is. I'd rather have this than nothing by a long shot. Definitely. There are so many knives that are substantially worse than this. This is still good. It just puts me in an awkward position because it's like, man, you know, like, comparatively, the only other things that I have that I feel like I should naturally compare it with are other CIVIVIs, which every single one is like, almost every single one is a home run. And so this one just feels like, it's like a family of hyper athletic siblings, right? There's like one of those families, they've got like 6 or 7 kids and each kid is a mega athlete. And then they have one who's like, he's pretty good. He's all right, you know? They got this. That's what this feels like. It just feels like if he or she were an only child, they would be, you know, they would seem, you know, really great on their own. But because their siblings are all so good, they just don't seem as good by contrast. So that's kind of where I'm at with this thing. I can still recommend it, I guess. I'll still put this knife on my recommended knives playlist, but this was a tough one. I didn't like this nearly as much as any of the other CIVIVI knives that I've handled. It's kind of sad because I mean, you know, at first glance, it's a good looking knife. If this were bigger, it might solve a lot of the issues. If it had a forward choil and a straighter handle and the thumb stud was in a little bit of a different place, boy, that would be a game changer for me. I probably would like this knife a lot more. But, that's, you know, personal preferences, you know, that can sometimes really affect a review. It's hard for me to not be biased towards my own preferences, but you might enjoy this more than me. I think that's pretty much it for today, guys. That's really all I can say. If you enjoyed this video or found it informative, please leave a like. If you'd like to check out my other content, I do, of course, have lots of videos of knives that are either expensive or inexpensive that I do or don't like, so check those out. And if you enjoy all my content, go ahead and click on this metal complex logo right here and subscribe because there's definitely more coming. Thanks again for watching, everybody, and have a great day.